Stella Artois has issued a voluntary recall of some of its 11.2-ounce bottles of beer in the U.S. and Canada because they may contain particles of glass.
There is a weed killer that shows up in some of America's best-selling beers. The active ingredient in Roundup, the stuff sprayed on crops to kill everything green, turned up in the can you drink on the weekend, small enough to slip past the law, real enough to end up in your glass. Here's why you never knew. Beer is the one thing you drink regularly that carries no ingredient label at all. None. Bread has to list what's in it. Soda does. Beer doesn't, because the companies that make it spent decades paying Washington to make sure you'd never be. 10 brands investigated, only 3 came back clean. Let's start with the worst one. At number 10 is Bud Light. Bud Light has been the best-selling beer in the United States for decades running. Anheuser-Busch, owned since 2008 by the Belgian-Brazilian conglomerate AB InBev, generates over $50 billion in global revenue annually. They have every resource in the world to brew a clean, transparent product. They have chosen not to. What you're actually getting in a can of Bud Light is water, barley malt, rice, and corn syrup. That last ingredient became the center of a public legal battle. AB InBev argued the corn syrup is consumed by the yeast during fermentation and doesn't appear in the finished product. Consumer advocacy groups and independent testing challenged that claim directly, flagging measurable residual traces in finished cans. But here's the point that cuts deeper than the chemistry. There is no ingredients label on any American beer. No federal law requires one. The question is not just what's in the can. The question is why a company earning $50 billion a year has spent decades lobbying Congress to make sure you are never told what's in it. The campaign contributions to Senate Agriculture Committee members are on public record. The outcome, no mandatory beer ingredient disclosure anywhere on the label, is the documented return on that investment. For anyone who has been drinking 2 or 3 of these a week, or who made Bud Light their household brand for 20 years, that corn syrup exposure accumulates quietly across thousands of cans. Inside a regulatory environment, the company paid to design around its own silence. 300 million cans sold last year, 0 ingredients disclosed on any of them. That's not a gap in the law. That's a purchased outcome. If you're paying budget prices for Bud Light, the natural assumption is that a more expensive, premium-branded domestic choice earns that price with cleaner ingredients. That assumption is exactly what the next brand has built a billion-dollar marketing empire on. A federal court put the truth on record, and it's coming up right now. Coming in at number 9, Coors Light. Molson. Coors built the entire Coors Light identity around natural purity, mountains, freshness, cold-filtered precision. The silver can and the world's most refreshing beer tagline have run continuously for 4 decades on a marketing budget in the hundreds of millions. Open the can, and the reality is considerably less poetic. Coors Light uses corn syrup in its fermentation process, the same as Bud Light. When AB InBev publicly called them out on this in a 2019 Super Bowl advertisement, Molson Coors didn't correct the record. They sued for defamation, not because the corn syrup claim was wrong, but because they said the public disclosure caused reputational harm. A federal judge dismissed the lawsuit. The ruling confirmed on the court record, yes, Coors Light uses corn syrup. The can still says nothing about it. Separately, the 2019 U.S. Right to Know report flagged glyphosate residue across several major domestic beers, with Coors portfolio products appearing in that dataset. The levels recorded were parts per trillion, described as low in isolation. But for families where Coors Light is the default at every cookout, every football Sunday, every holiday for the past 15 years, that exposure isn't isolated. It is structural. They sent the lawsuit first. The corn syrup stayed. You bought the mountain. They never told you what they added to the water, and they spent legal fees making sure no court forced them to. Think paying more means getting something cleaner? We're about to test that assumption on the brand that has been calling itself the king of beers since 1876. What the lab results say about the king's ingredients is a different kind of story, and it's the next one up. At number 8, Budweiser. The full-strength original has a heritage story polished to a museum shine. The Clydesdales at every Super Bowl, the 1876 founding narrative, the self-declared king of beers. All of it operating today inside the same AB InBev infrastructure as Bud Light, with the same adjunct-forward brewing profile underneath the pageantry. Budweiser uses rice as its primary fermentation adjunct rather than corn syrup, which the company markets as a meaningful point of distinction. But rice in commercial brewing is a cost reduction strategy, not a quality indicator. It's cheaper than barley malt, produces a thinner and lighter body, cuts the grain bill significantly, and consumers have been conditioned across generations to experience that thinness as the authentic American lager taste. In Europe, where alcohol ingredient transparency requirements are more rigorous than in the United States, AB InBev's formulations for the same Budweiser label have historically differed from what they sell here. Same iconic label, potentially a different product underneath, depending on which country's disclosure requirements apply. A 2020 consumer class action lawsuit alleged that Budweiser's Brewed the Hard Way campaign was deceptive, given how extensively the process relies on adjunct fermentation and industrial automation. The same glyphosate residue study that flagged Coors Light also flagged Budweiser, not as an isolated result, but as part of a consistent pattern running across the entire AB InBev domestic lineup. 3 generations of trust built on an original recipe. The formula shifted. The Clydesdales stayed exactly where they were, still pulling the same wagon in a different direction. See the pattern? Budget brand, premium brand, heritage brand, all sitting inside the same 2 conglomerates, all running the same ingredient playbook, all protected by the same no-label laws. The next brand will make you think you've stepped completely outside that system. You haven't, and a public court filing proved it. Number 7 is the brand most people buy specifically as their escape from corporate beer. At number 7, Pabst Blue Ribbon. PBR won its ribbon at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. For most of the 20th century, it was a legitimate regional beer, genuinely independent, genuinely local. Then it became an ironic craft bar staple in the early 2000s. Then a nostalgia brand. What it is today, operationally, is a company that does not own a single brewery anywhere in the world. Every drop of PBR production is contracted out to Miller Brewing facilities owned by Molson Coors, the same conglomerate behind Coors Light and Miller Lite. When you buy PBR believing you're supporting something outside the corporate system, you are purchasing a Molson Coors product wearing an independent-looking label. The ingredient profile is functionally identical to other Miller Coors industrial products: corn syrup adjuncts, large-scale automated fermentation, and zero ingredient disclosure required. A 2020 legal dispute between PBR and Miller Coors made national headlines when Pabst sued over fears the exclusive brewing contract might be terminated. Those public court filings revealed in meticulous detail exactly how thoroughly the brand's independent identity is a legal fiction layered entirely on top of another company's infrastructure. The Blue Ribbon is 19th century marketing history. The brewery it pointed to hasn't existed in decades. What's in the can is a Molson Coors product. 30 years sold as independence, not one barrel brewed independently. A lot of viewers have given up on domestic brands entirely and moved to craft beer as the clear exit from everything just described. The next brand on this list is on tap at nearly every chain restaurant in America, and it spent years actively hiding the name of the company that made it. Here's where it gets personal. Number 6 is Blue Moon. Blue Moon, Belgian white, is available in every stadium, every major chain restaurant, every grocery beer aisle, every hotel bar from Maine to California. It is sold as an artisanal, Belgian-inspired craft beer, brewed with wheat and orange peel for a more sophisticated, handcrafted experience. What the label concealed for years, Blue Moon is a Miller Coors product, built inside the same Molson Coors corporate structure as Coors Light and Miller Lite. For years, the packaging printed only Blue Moon Brewing Company, with no parent company disclosure anywhere on the label, specifically designed to let consumers who were actively avoiding conglomerate products believe they were buying from an independent craft brewer. A class action lawsuit filed in 2015 argued exactly this. The branding was deliberately engineered to mislead consumers paying a craft premium for an industrial product from one of the largest beer companies on earth. The case was dismissed on technical legal grounds. The core allegation was never seriously disputed in the company's own court filings. The citrus character draws separate scrutiny. The orange peel flavor relies partly on flavoring agents, not on meaningful quantities of actual orange peel at the volumes used in brewing. The Belgian designation is a stylistic label borrowed from market positioning. The craft image is the product they are actually selling. The beer inside is almost incidental to it. Artisan label. Industrial production. The identity concealment was the strategy from day one. If this kind of information is useful to you, if knowing what's actually inside the can before you buy it matters, hit subscribe now. It's free, and it means you never have to stand in the beer aisle guessing what the label isn't telling you. The next brand ran a national television campaign publicly mocking a competitor for an ingredient it also uses. The ad ran for months before a correction was forced. That brand is number 5, and it is sitting in a lot of kitchens right now. This next one might surprise you. Number 5. Miller Lite. For 50 years, Miller Lite and Bud Light have divided the American light beer market between them. Miller Lite's advertising strategy for the past decade has centered on a beer made with more hops, positioning it as a more natural, flavor-forward alternative to its major competitor. That hop claim is technically accurate with respect to quantity. What the campaign carefully omits. Miller Lite also uses corn syrup in fermentation, the same adjunct present in Bud Light, Coors Light, and most of the brands already covered in this video. In 2022, Miller Lite ran a prominent national advertising campaign directly mocking Bud Light for its corn syrup use, framing that mockery as evidence of Miller Lite's cleaner, superior ingredients. Bud Light's parent company publicly noted the obvious. Miller Lite contains the same ingredient. The campaign was walked back. A consumer advocacy organization separately filed an FDA complaint arguing the More Hops campaign was specifically engineered to imply a cleaner product than what's actually in the can, potentially violating food advertising transparency requirements. The FDA took no formal action. The corn syrup is still in every can. The hop-forward advertising is still on television. Nothing on the label has changed since the controversy. 50 years of drinker loyalty held together by an advertising campaign that spent months publicly shaming a competitor for doing exactly what it also does. The corn syrup stayed, only the ad changed. The brand at number 4 has a devoted following that will argue it is the one exception to everything you've just heard. The health-conscious beer that actually earns that positioning. What the testing data shows is a very different story. And if this has been your go-to safe pick for years, you need to hear this next one. Number 4 built its entire modern identity around the one thing none of the previous brands could credibly claim: health.
Number 4.
Michelob Ultra is AB InBev's fastest-growing domestic brand. Low calories, low carbs, marathons in the advertising, elite athletes, and cyclists on the packaging. The entire premise is that Michelob Ultra fits seamlessly inside a genuinely healthy lifestyle without compromise. Consumers pay a meaningful premium for that positioning. Here is what the premium does not buy. Ingredient disclosure. Michelob Ultra is subject to the same zero-label regime that governs every other beer on this list. No ingredients panel required. No listing of adjuncts, processing agents, or fermentation inputs. And the same 2019 glyphosate residue study by U.S. Right to Know that flagged Bud Light, Budweiser, and Coors Light also flagged Michelob Ultra, not as an outlier, but as a consistent data point across the AB InBev domestic product pattern. For anyone who managed their diet carefully, paid closer attention to what goes into their body, and specifically switched to Ultra as the beer that fit that commitment, the athletic brand architecture is doing work the actual product cannot independently support. You did the research. You made what felt like the informed, health-conscious choice. The ingredient information they are not required to show you suggests you made that choice without the most relevant data available. They sell you the marathon finish line. They're counting on you not thinking too hard about what's inside the bottle you're drinking at mile 1, because nothing on the label is required to tell you. The next brand on this list spent 192 years earning its independent reputation. Then one decision in 2021 changed what most of its loyal customers still don't know they're buying is. At number 3, a brand with a genuinely earned history that recently made a structural change most of its customers haven't been told about.
Number 3.
Yuengling, America's oldest continuously operating brewery, founded in Pottsville, Pennsylvania in 1829, family-owned through 6 generations. For most of its existence, Yuengling represented a real alternative to conglomerate beer, regionally focused, independently produced, operating by its own standards on its own timeline. In 2021, Yuengling entered a formal 50-50 joint venture with Molson Coors to fund national expansion beyond its traditional East Coast market. Under this arrangement, Yuengling product intended for new national markets is now produced inside Molson Coors brewing facilities, the same infrastructure behind Coors Light and Miller Lite. The original Pottsville and Tampa breweries continue operating for their established regional markets, but the national expansion product now moves through the same conglomerate supply chain this entire list has been examining. The same pesticide residue testing that flagged other major domestic brands also included Yuengling's flagship lager in its dataset. The independence narrative that built the brand's modern identity and commanded a loyalty premium in its core markets has become, for the national product, a Molson Coors joint venture, the oldest brewery in America. Its newest business partner, the conglomerate, it spent 192 years not being associated with. For anyone who chose Yuengling specifically because that independence was the entire point, the joint venture changes the math in ways the label is not going to tell you. If buying imported has felt like the safe exit from all of this, if the assumption has been that crossing a border means stricter standards and cleaner ingredients, the number 2 slot is going to reframe that assumption completely, and it involves the most recognized beer import in the country. The number 2 spot goes to the brand that has sold more Americans on the feeling of escape than almost anything else in the cooler.
Number 2.
Corona, the best-selling imported beer in the United States, the lime wedge, the clear glass bottle, the beach, the warmth of somewhere far outside the ordinary. Grupo Modelo brews it in Mexico. What the brand doesn't bring to the front of the label, Grupo Modelo has been wholly owned by AB InBev since 2013. When you buy Corona as a deliberate alternative to Bud Light, you are still buying an Anheuser-Busch InBev product. Same holding company, same global infrastructure, same complete absence of any U.S. requirement to disclose ingredients on the label. AB InBev acquired Grupo Modelo specifically because the import identity and brand equity allowed them to command a significantly higher price point than their domestic portfolio while running the same underlying production economics. The premium you pay for that clear bottle flows back to the same shareholders and the same corporate board as Bud Light and Michelob Ultra. For anyone who deliberately chose imported over domestic because they believed foreign sourcing was more transparent or the standards were stricter, AB InBev owns that reasoning too. The bottle crossed the border. The company did not. The beach in the advertising is real. The independence is a geographic illusion built on a 2013 acquisition that most Corona drinkers have never been told about, and that AB InBev has had no financial incentive to advertise. 9 brands, 9 different shapes for the same story, undisclosed adjuncts, conglomerate infrastructure in independent clothing, and a federal loophole that makes all of it invisible by design. But 3 brands operate in a completely different way. Here is what honest actually looks like on a shelf. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, founded in 1980 in Chico, California by Ken and Barbara Grossman, still family-owned today, no parent conglomerate sitting above it. Sierra Nevada does not use corn syrup, does not use rice adjuncts. Its ingredient declaration, water, malted barley, hops, yeast, has been confirmed through third-party testing conducted by craft beer advocacy organizations with no financial relationship with the brewery. Sierra Nevada holds USDA Biopreferred certification and participates in regular ingredient and environmental audits. The dry hop character in their pale ale is a genuine brewing decision. They were among the first American craft breweries to popularize the Cascade hop variety, and their process helped define what American hop-forward beer could actually taste like. Pour it into a glass and the difference is immediate. A clear amber body, a resinous and slightly piney aroma with a citrus undercurrent, and a flavor that balances clean malt sweetness against real bitterness. No chemical aftertaste, no adjunct thinning in the body, no finish that turns synthetic after a few seconds. What you taste is a direct product of what the label represents. In a category where the ingredient list is hidden by deliberate regulatory design, voluntarily publishing it and consistently passing independent third-party scrutiny is the baseline of honesty the system should require of every brewer in America. It currently requires it of no one. Sierra Nevada does it anyway and has done it for over 40 years without a single lobbying dollar spent to prevent you from reading the label. That is the whole difference. New Belgium Fat Tire. Brewed in Fort Collins, Colorado, with one of the most credible third-party accountability structures in American craft brewing. New Belgium became the first wind-powered craft brewery in the United States and has held B Corporation certification since 2013, meaning an independent certifying body audits its environmental, social, and business practices on a regular cycle and publishes those results publicly, with no financial relationship to the brewery. Fat Tire's ingredient profile is water, barley malt, hops, and yeast. No corn syrup, no rice adjuncts, no artificial preservatives, and no residues flagged in independent testing. The brewery publishes its ingredient information proactively and has been a consistent participant in consumer transparency advocacy campaigns within the craft beer industry. New Belgium sold to Lion Little World Beverages, an Australian company, in 2019. Corporate context worth knowing as you evaluate it. But the B Corp certification, the brewing standards, and the third-party ingredient accountability have remained in place through that ownership transition and are independently verified on an ongoing basis. Pour fat tire in a glass and it presents amber and slightly hazy, with a biscuity malt aroma and moderate hop character that doesn't overpower the body. The finish is clean and slightly sweet, with a roundness that comes from actual malt character rather than adjunct thinning. The label and the product are telling the same story. That should be standard across every beer on a shelf. In this industry, it is still the exception. Dogfish Head 60 Minute IPA. Founded in 1995 in Milton, Delaware by Sam Calagione, acquired by Boston Beer Company, makers of Samuel Adams, in 2019. That acquisition adds corporate context worth acknowledging up front. But Dogfish Head maintains its own brewing operations, its own fermentation standards, and has been consistently transparent about ingredients and process through and after that ownership change. The 60-minute IPA takes its name from a real brewing technique, continuous hopping across a 60-minute boil, where hops are added in a slow, steady stream rather than in scheduled, discrete additions. It is a genuine process with a measurable and audible impact on the finished beer, not a marketing phrase attached to a standard industrial product. No corn syrup, no rice adjuncts, no artificial hop extracts or clarifying agents flagged in independent third-party testing of their flagship lineup. Pour the 60-minute and the difference from an adjunct domestic lager is immediate and unmistakable. Resinous, citrusy, with a bright sustained bitterness and a clean dry finish that resolves without turning chemical or harsh. Your palate has always known the difference between a beer, built honestly, and one built around a margin calculation and a marketing budget. It has been trying to tell you something every time you cracked open one of the first 10 brands on this list. Now you have the full context to understand exactly what it was saying. 10 brands, a federal loophole that lets every one of them stay silent about what's inside. 3 that chose transparency anyway. The decision about what sits in your refrigerator is now yours to make with open eyes. Drop a comment right now if one of those 10 brands is in your fridge this week. Let's find out how many of us have been buying the same thing for years without knowing what was actually inside. And if you want to see this same investigation applied to orange juice, same hidden ingredient problem, same lobbying history, same federal label silence, that video is already on the channel. The findings run in exactly the same direction. What's the one beer brand you've been loyal to for years? The one you'd defend against anyone? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how many of them made this list. Subscribe now, and if you're watching on TV, tap your remote so you never get blindsided again.